Welcome to TFD Talks Education. Today, I am joined by Kurt Slater, principal at Wyoming Elementary in the great state of Minnesota. Hi, Kurt. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Tyler?
I'm doing well. What's the weather like in Minnesota today?
You know, it's actually sunny and it's supposed to be a high of 65. So in Minnesota, we're loving it.
That sounds a lot nicer than here within the St. Louis area. And I was in Minnesota a while ago on a business trip, and it was Mall of America. It's a big deal there, but man, it's cold up there.
Yeah, it's been so chilly that the best way I can tell you is that the Minnesota Twins, are doing really well this year, and they advertised last week to the rest of the seats that were left for $5 for the month of May, just because it has been a little bit chilly. So, but it's sold out now, so everyone likes a good deal.
Well, that's great. All right, well, I came across information on the NESP website. It was just kind of interesting background. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of where you're at in your career, what you think might have kind of got you there, a little bit of upbringing that might have impacted some of what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, I think we all have a story. An interesting thing about when you're in education, everyone has usually went through education, so they can talk about, I could ask you your favorite teacher in elementary or high school or someone that had that impact. And, I was the type of kid that asked for love in very mysterious ways, got in a lot of mischief. Grew up in a little bit of a dysfunctional home, which I think all families are dysfunctional in some ways or in others. Ours was just a little bit tainted with alcohol and drug abuse. And so with that, when you're around that type of environment, you create maybe some poor social skills that other people might expect something different, but I would take those lessons I learned at home with maybe an abusive dad or a little disruptive dinner, and I would take those same skills back to school, not knowing that what I was living in was maybe a little bit different than what other people. I just always loved my mom and dad, still love them today, and just thought that was normal childhood, what we were dealing with. I went to Dayton Elementary, a small little town north of Minneapolis, and grew up only a couple blocks from school. So when I get suspended or kicked off the bus, I did a lot of walking to school, which wasn't always bad. But I was the type of kid that most teachers didn't want to see on their class roster that next year. Kind of like the stories traveled well with me. I had a big heart, but I just not always probably the best academic student in the sense of being respectful and polite and all of those things. Did okay. Luckily, I'm a big guy. I'm about 6'7", shrinking these days, maybe down to about 6'6". But because of that, was pretty good at sports, and found that a lot of people went out of their way to help me because of some of my athletic abilities, kind of as I reflect on it now. But I had a lot of strong teachers, and that's where the passion for me, once I was able to go to college, kind of like I love the feeling of making a difference with kids. And so I went into education, did fairly well high school wise, and went and played basketball at Morehead State, which is a college just on the border of North Dakota in the town called Fargo, popular for a movie.
Yeah.
And Minnesota, so about 3 hours away from Minneapolis, 3.5 hours from Minneapolis, and played basketball there and went into elementary ed. And my dream was always to come back and give back to the community where I went to school. And fortunately, I was lucky to come back and be a teacher at Coon Rapids Middle School. Anoka is the Halloween capital of the world for your listeners. So if anybody ever wants a great fun time to come to Minnesota in October, great fall weather, but also you could experience the Halloween capital of the world. And was a sixth grade teacher for 7 years. And in that time, it seems like, being a male teacher, I was getting more and more of the difficult kids that were really struggling, which I had a connection with because I had my own personal story, but found that I could maybe do more if I went into like being an assistant principal or something to help those kids. I really had a passion for the kids that weren't being successful in the class. And from there was assistant principal for 14 years in a middle school at 3 different places. And then decided to try something different 4 years ago and went to the elementary world. And where I am now at Wyoming Elementary, and just north of St. Paul, about 40 miles, in a small blue-collar working community that is just really a delight to work for.
One thing that stood out to me is kind of a little bit of the upbringing and some of the challenges you faced with, as you kind of term your dysfunctional family situation growing up. Looking back a little bit with some hindsight, do you feel that in some ways you can see now that really gave you some different kinds of skills that really are useful today, kind of resilience or pushing through, or maybe seeing some situations where someone might think of it, so the world didn't work out for me, I'm never going to do anything, where you thought differently than that, or maybe, does that make any sense? Kind of.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And I think probably one of the biggest things that I've figured out is that children don't come with a user guide. You know, if you as a parent or start to struggle, or what's interesting is that I have 3 kids, and all 3 kids are so different. But like when you're a young parent, you're thinking, okay, they're all going to go through the baby stage and then go through this stage, and so I've found that not only am I able to do that with our students around what you're talking a little bit about, making that connection and telling them a little bit my story and having empathy for them, knowing that every child has their own story. But the bigger part is getting families in and working with moms and dads and saying, hey, you're going to go through this stage, and that definitely was a lot of my work at the middle school level. When you're talking about 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, that's that 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old range. They're all going through puberty, adolescence. They're starting to rebel against the adults that love them the most. And how do you work with families when, everybody at that point in time, and it's interesting, I think, in society, when things go wrong, we always look for someone to blame instead of looking for our ownership. So a lot of times I just tell parents, the answer's within this room. We are the adults here, so what can we do to help you with this? And never making that phone call when I need to make those phone calls about, like, I'm calling to shame someone. I'm calling to say, hey, we have this going on at school and we could really use your support. When do you have time to talk? And I think parents have appreciated that. But also I think the struggle has been for those families that want to be the principal to be punitive. Tyler, you went to school, and maybe if your mom would see you at and you see the principal, she'd say something like this. I hear it all the time. Tyler, you see that Mr. Slater right there? He's the principal, and I don't want to ever see you in his office. I don't want to ever get a phone call from Mr. Slater. And I tell parents all the time, is like that's old school. Like I make positive phone calls every day. If you do get a call from me, it's because I'm concerned. But I don't want children afraid of me, because I'm just another adult in their life that has the ability to maybe provide a little more support than other people, because my schedule is not written by a bell. It's not, so my day is not by a bell written. So I'm able to be proactive. So as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to be heading outside to set up a little bit of a soccer obstacle course, because our kids are struggling playing soccer because there's all the rules. But what skill development can I do? So trying to be proactive also is looking at, all kids want to be engaged. They want to have it. They want to be successful. No one wakes up in the morning. Like, you didn't wake up this morning and say, gosh, I hope I can really mess up this interview with Kurt Slater today. I hope it just is the worst thing ever. Yeah. But when times get tough, then where do we go? Who's in our corner? What can we do that, hey, this isn't going the way I had it planned? And I don't think any teacher wakes up any morning wanting to create a miserable learning environment for kids. And so it's that positive mindset that we have to have in a very negative culture that we live in right now.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Mindset of people. Once in a while, I got 2 little kids, 6 and 4, and my little girl's like, that's not fair. And I'll say, you want life to be fair, you're not gonna get a whole lot of empathy from me. Like, life is fair. We try to do what's right. We try to be, but life's gonna be unfair lots of times. And I think kind of learning to cope, because we're all dealt different things. Like, you're a pretty tall guy. I'm kind of a tall guy. Just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, we're dealt different hands, and I've always thought it's more how you play the hand you're dealt versus controlling the hand you're dealt. It's so much of life, because we're all good at some things, we're all bad at lots of things, and utilizing that combination to get where it is you really want to go. Yeah, it stood out because you talked about you seem kind of really anti-punitive punishment, which I think is an interesting stance for someone that probably deals a lot with discipline type things with students and things like that. Have you always kind of been that way? Has that maybe been life lessons or things that have molded you along the way that helped you get a little bit of that stance?
No, I haven't always been that way. I mean, I just so we're really clear. I grew up in a home that, you did something wrong, the belt came out, and and again, people, believe in lickings or not lickings. I mean, I had respect for my dad, even if it was a little bit of fear in my dad. But again, I think the part where I've found is that I've asked a lot of people this question, and I've wondered about it a lot. So I always look at when we tell our story, what scarred you, Tyler? What's something that has scarred you along your journey? And one of the scars that I have along my journey is I had a teacher, and I'm not going to get too specific so anyone can figure it out, but I had a teacher that when I misbehaved in her class, she made me read a book that was a grade level above my ability to read.
Well, just to embarrass you, right?
Yeah, so I had to stand in front of the class on a chair and I had to read the book. And at that point in time, like 10 years down the road when I'm in college now, I was wondering like, hey, I wonder what book she read that was a good intervention. One of my favorite things, and this is going to age me, but as a kid, I loved Little House on the Prairie. And I always found it interesting when Willie had to put the dunce hat on in the one schoolhouse and said, hey, I wonder where I'm going to find that book to be like, hey, that dunce hat. I wonder who read that, what the research was around it. But then I also look at what we've done in my journey in education. I've looked at when does time heal any skills? I asked that, when does time ever solve any behavior problems? So if you today do something really stupid and a police officer puts you in jail for a period of time, does that time change your way or what you did? Or is it just punitive? Do you lose your job or whatever else? And I'm not going to get into, imprisonment or not imprisonment, but I just look at that whole part of, I remember many, many hours of not getting a math assignment done at Jackson Junior High, and my consequences that I missed lunch with my peers. Mm-hmm. And I just never could figure out like how that correlated. How did my math skills correlate with lunch? But educators have always found, let's take away what they love the most. So that's Fayette or whatever their strengths are. Let's take that away and give them more time, and then that's going to get better. So I really found through trial and error that suspending kids didn't work. Like I went through a process where I followed, and I still will suspend kids, but you follow district protocol of when we should and shouldn't suspend kids. There are natural consequences that we have, school board policy in all of our schools. But when that kid comes back, so what? Now for me, if you suspended me, I'm just going to talk about me. You suspend me back in the day, I went home to a dad that was going to give me a licking and then make me sit in my room and do chores and all that stuff around. But no one worked with me around the skill of why I got suspended. So it's always that interesting thing. Like I got suspended because I was rude and disrespectful, but no one worked with me. Like here's some strategies on not being rude and disrespectful. So I just saw this crazy pattern. Like before this time, I could almost pick the pattern of when a kid was coming to my office, when this was going to happen, nothing was changing. And that's where I really started to look at restorative practices. And I really looked at, taking the time to teach social skills and really to figure out the function of the behavior. So a lot of my time was spent with special ed students, really figuring out the ABCs of behavior, the antecedent, the behavior, and then the really looking at, okay, what's next for that student. And so I've just found that I've told my staff and I've told parents that the office, if you send a student to the office, you're asking for us to help change the behavior. You're not sending a student to the office because you want this punishment and you're following this flow chart and then this, and this is going to happen, but you're really looking for some help around that. And it correlates to what I need. If I am struggling, hopefully wherever I'm struggling, if it's at home or at work or wherever, someone's going to look at me and say, hey, this is why you're struggling, or this is why we think you're struggling. Let's work on some of these skills. And so that's really where I've found, again, in there I've put that I've been training for 14 years, something called PBIS. It's Positive Behavior Intervention Support. Your listeners can easily look up the national site. It's not necessarily brand new, but what it does is it gives schools a framework. It's not a program. You're not going to pay for it, but it's a framework of how you can support kids throughout their day. And I think that's what we have to do more of. We have to really look at a child that every kid is successful at times in their day, and some kids are not successful. But a kid's not a bad kid all day. A kid doesn't have poor skills all day long. There's certain things that they're very successful at. And what's interesting is in the past, if Tyler struggles at reading, what happened in school when you were in school? We gave Tyler more reading, a little bit longer, a little bit louder, and it didn't change a lot of the results. But we never really figured out, like, okay, what's Tyler's strengths? Well, Tyler's strengths is he loves football. So let's do some reading around some of football things. And now all of a sudden, maybe Tyler might be a little bit more interested, but really tying that into some of your strengths and then working on that weakness instead of going right after the weakness all the time. And I think that's the same thing with academics as it is with behavior, that we have to use some of our strengths to support the weaknesses, but we do have to address the weakness. So some people might hear, oh, he's just a fluffy guy who wants all this stuff. It's like, no, I want to see data that supports success. I don't want to see any more dunce hats. And so the challenge that I have is where do we see dunce hats right now in education? I believe we see them in behavior charts. When a teacher has a chart of behavior where every kid can see how that child's doing throughout the day, how does that change anything? That we can all see that Tyler, is blurting out, so now his clothespin moves up or down. I'm looking for the research to support that, but we see it in a lot of places in education. So I just think we have to look at those things and always ask the question: if this works with kids, it would also work with adults.
Mm-hmm.
So would adults ever want to see a behavior chart where Mr. Slater has it in the honor room or staff lounge, where I'm moving clothespins up and down on staff are doing throughout the year? And would that help that their peers will be able to recognize when you're struggling to come to work on time, or all these other things that impact their life?
That's an interesting take. Yeah, interesting take. Something else you had mentioned on the pre-interview stuff is about how the principal role has evolved in the social media world, and Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. Everyone's got an HD camera in their pocket ready for whatever. You've been around the block a couple of times as things have evolved over the years. How do you think that has kind of changed and impacted your role, your effectiveness as an educator in the social media world?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, social media is positive and it's negative. The parts that I'll say to you that are super positive is that it gives schools the opportunity to tell their stories. I every day get to be in my school and see amazing things going on. And if I can take a picture and throw that on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, I can get 80 or 90 family members to see the great things that are going on. Mm-hmm. Some people like it and some people don't, what's happening right now in education, but it's becoming very competitive. There's a lot of charter schools, a lot of other schools opening up. So no longer, back in the day, people would move into an area and whatever yellow bus came by, that's where they sent their kids to school. No longer is that the take. Parents are digging in, and it's like a good restaurant. There's lots of different options, and there's all the way from online options, or you can, go to this school or that school. And so I really try to make the positives so loud that we drowned out the negative, because I can't always control maybe something that happens on the bus, a situation that happens there, but parents can also use social media for that. They can put on there to say, hey, did you hear Mr. Slater took away birthday cupcakes? I can't believe that, he only did that because he's getting fat and he doesn't want to be tempted every day with cupcakes. I can't ever take that back when that goes out there, and the 80 or 90 people that then comment about, why school should, let kids have birthday treats or whatever the issue is with schools. So but I also think that social media is the opportunity to really celebrate all the things that we're doing. So at our school, if you put in hashtag Wyoming Way, again, our small town is Wyoming, Minnesota. It's not in the state of Wyoming. But if you put that in there, you're going to see all the great things that we're doing. And really what the Wyoming means is that we take the time to positively acknowledge each other for all of the things that we do every day. And so that's where it's kind of our positive message. And then the other thing I'd say about social media is it lets grandparents and other people that maybe don't live by us see some of the events. So I started to use Facebook Live this year. Again, you're down in St. Louis. We had several snow days in Minnesota this year across the country. I think there's a lot of snow days. Well, I took those days and just started reading books to kids, and was really surprised at how many people would go on Facebook Live and follow along as I was reading a book, or I was riding an electric scooter around one day just showing the kids what I do on my off days when no one's around. Mm-hmm. But just letting them also see who we are. And then the other thing is that because we're a PBS school, we really believe in ROAR, which stands for Wildcats Roar, which means we're respectful, we're on task, we achieve, and we're responsible. But I love when parents tag us where their child is wearing one of our Wyoming shirts, catching a large fish at Walt Disney World, all those other places, that they're proud of where they go to school. And I think that being part of a community, you want to be proud of your schools. And that's a great way to do it with social media.
I gotcha. One other thing too, which I really stood out to me, is you talked about the take of mental health and how that is such an evolution. And I personally believe we still barely understand the mind, and mental health now is just now starting to get attention and some empathy, maybe not understanding, but empathy at least. And how do you think that has played a role in your role there?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that I went to Anoka High School, and I told you that Anoka is the Halloween capital of the world, but it was also one of the largest mental health hospitals in the state back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when I went to high school. And it was interesting because when I was driving by it every day going to high school, we all had a very negative mindset of the hospital. That's where all the crazy people go, and if you're crazy, there's something wrong with you. I think the first thing that's great about society is that we're at least starting to talk about mental health. I just had a chance to listen to some research out there, and I think it's like 48% of people, and we're sitting in this group as this professor's talking about, 48% of people are anxious in society right now. And so they said, look to the person to your left or look to the person to the right, and one of the three of you are anxious. You have anxieties, you have maybe some depression, whatever the case is. And that's pretty not only scary, I mean, I shouldn't say scary, but it's pretty alarming to be like, what are we doing for that? How are we doing to make sure people are in a good state of mind, ready to, for school, we always say, are you ready to learn? And a lot of times in being part of Minnesota Nice is that we say good morning to everyone and say something like this. Tyler, good morning. How was your weekend?
Mm-hmm.
And what's your answer?
Fine.
It was good. Fine.
Yeah.
Am I ready for you to say it was horrible? I was depressed all weekend. I laid in bed. I mean, am I really ready for that other answer? And I think that we need to continue to look at those platforms, giving people that opportunity to say, hey, I didn't have a very good weekend. And here's some of the things that I'm struggling a little bit. Forest Lake Area Schools is doing a really good job with our health program, giving our staff the opportunity for some counseling appointments. And before, if you went to a counselor, there's always something wrong. It's so funny when I say dysfunctional and I speak about that. People are like, oh, you had a really tough childhood. And I was like, well, if you look at all of our families, we all have a story. We all have no matter if it's depression, if it's alcoholism, drug addiction, that whole thing of like when you talk about family dynamics is that we need to be there for each other during those tough times. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited that we're ready to start talking about mental health. I think now it's really like, how do we get the funding to support these things? Because most of our schools right now, I'd say almost all of them are under funded around counseling. Again, I'm at a building with 600 kids. We have one counselor. Well, I think for the elementary, it's about a 250 to 1 ratio. We almost need 2.5 counselors, 3 counselors. And so then how do we do that? Because then, families are also looking for support outside, and to hear the horror stories of kids trying to get support outside of school around the mental health, and they're saying, hey, we're 6 months out. Well, you break your arm and you're 6 months out. I hate to tell you, your arm's never going to work again the correct way. Mm-hmm. We're doing that same thing with mental health. So we have a lot of work to do, but at least we're ready to start talking about it, not only in our society, but as in schools, and really starts, opening that door to the people that need help.